Welcome back to Eyes on Democracy. I'm Jabir Deralla, and I'm delighted to welcome you to episode 3 of our podcast. One day before Trump meets Putin in a summit many call historic, I call it overhyped and dangerous. As I wrote in Innocent Blood for a Handshake the other day, peace and freedom must never be traded for photo ops or headlines and fame and sensationalism. But however, we're not here to discuss the headlines. We never do. This is a conversation about defending democracy and about ensuring that Ukraine's freedom and Europe's peace aren't bargained away. That's exactly why today's conversation matters. In fact, today we're looking beyond the headlines to deeper, harder truths about the world's reality, shaped by media. We discuss journalism, media freedoms, and democracy, especially in times of war. This episode is about the courage to report under fire, the ethics of telling the truth when lies are weaponized, and what the experience of journalists in Ukraine teaches us about resilience, justice, and the future of free societies. I welcome you, Roger, here. Where are you? Where am I finding you now?
Thank you, Jabir. Yeah, I'm in near Florence in Italy.
Greetings to you. I'm here
greetings
with Roger Casale. I just wanted to tell our audiences I'm here with Roger Casale in episode 3. What do you think about my introduction, Roger? I mean,
well, greetings once again. Greetings from Florence, Jabir, and thank you very much for that introduction. And if I must just very, very briefly add to it, you used the word courage, and our special guest today, Jabir, as you know, but our viewers don't know this, is a very courageous journalist, a very good journalist, and a great champion of the rights of journalists, Lina Kushch. And I say great champion of the rights of journalists because she is, in fact, the National Secretary of the National Union of Journalists in Ukraine. So we are very fortunate to have her with us speaking. She's going to be speaking to us directly from Kyiv. And I think we are both of us, aren't we, Sabir, looking forward very much to the insights that Lina is going to share with us, having lived through the reality since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the reality of this every day, with great professionalism, with great, as I said, with great courage, and with great concern and care, which we share for the safety of frontline journalists in Ukraine, one of whom we're going to be talking about, who was sadly murdered by the Russian regime later on. But there are hundreds and hundreds of journalists working at the front line, and Lina's organisation, National Union of Journalists, does so much to protect them. And I hope that our viewers will become aware of this work, and we must find a way to support it also practically and materially if we can. But first, we're going to hear from in a short while. We're going to hear from Lina. We're very fortunate to have her with us today.
Yes, Roger, this is a vital topic, and it's great that we have Lina Kushch with us in a moment, and her insights are extremely valuable to us and to the public, to our audiences, and she will bring more clarity to this discussion, I'm sure. We will, of course, discuss the democratic perspectives, freedom and peace in the second part of this episode, while now I suggest to start with the fact that media freedom across Europe is under serious strain. The European Media Freedom Act, adopted in 2024, and it just started being implemented a couple of days ago. I think it was scheduled to start being implemented on August the 8th. It lays down binding rules across the EU to ensure editorial independence, protect journalistic sources, increase media ownership transparency, and regulate state advertising, and so on and so on. And I would say that this full application that started just a couple of days ago is valuable. It's important. It's good that it happens. But the enforcements, as always, remain uneven across the European Union, and not to speak about the countries in Europe that are out of the European Union.
That's right, Jabir, and you're right to focus on the important work that's going on in Europe to protect freedom of the press, and we're going to talk more about that, obviously, also with Lina. But just let me remind our viewers that as we record this podcast, you're not seeing this live, but as we record it, President Zelensky is actually in Berlin with Chancellor Merz, and who has just given a press conference. And what he has said, and I think this is a really important statement, is that the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and what is happening today is reviving the division of Europe. And what we need in Europe is a united Europe and not a divided Europe. A divided Europe has brought us nothing but war and destruction, and we want peace and prosperity and sustainability. And therefore, a united Europe is right. So I don't think you can separate the future of Ukraine from the future of Europe. And from what Chancellor Merz was saying this afternoon, I don't think Chancellor Merz thinks that either. And I was very pleased to hear him make that statement and make that call for Europe, and to remind us of Europe's history, and that division leads to war and destruction. And the way for us to be strong and peaceful and stable is to be united. And so if we just take the issue of journalism and freedom of the press, which is extremely important, because this is an attack on our democracy, and it's not just an attack on Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, which is a democracy. It's also there are also attacks, and we've talked about this a lot, and we'll talk about this more, on democracies in the European Union and on journalists, not just in Ukraine, but across the continent. And this is coming, there's a kind of, seems to be a kind of culture, growing culture of clamping down and harassing journalists, more surveillance, legal harassment, even physical violence. What's slaps, SLAPP, lawsuits that are meant to silence scrutiny. And, let's remember that journalists do a fantastic job on behalf of the citizens. I mean, I'm a citizen. I used to be an MP, now I'm a citizen. And I want to live in a democracy. And a democracy for me is an absolute sine qua non for a democracy. It's freedom of the press. So how, as a citizen, how can I have feel that I'm confident in my democracy if I don't have freedom of the press? And how can I have freedom of the press if journalists are constantly under surveillance and under scrutiny and being harassed and have been threatened with lawsuits? It's got to stop. I don't want to see this as a citizen. And I want other citizens to stand up and say, we don't want to see this either. We want a free press because we live in a democracy and we want to know what's going on. And it's journalists who can tell us what's going on, especially when it comes to Ukraine, the frontline journalists in Ukraine. But it's not, as I say, this is a European-wide phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. We've got democratic backsliding in some EU member states, haven't we, Jabir? And we look at Hungary, Slovakia, as well as others. And so there's increasing attempt to manifest media control over the media, and through that, there's an ownership issue there as well of media, especially in places like Hungary. And so you control the media, you control the public discourse. And if you control the public discourse, you are undermining our democracy. And I don't want you to undermine my democracy, because I'm a citizen and I want my democracy protected.
Those are all excellent points indeed. And we need to also emphasize that there is a sharp rise in attacks on journalists. Data from Media Freedom Rapid Response platform reveals a sharp uptick. In 2024 only, 1,548 media freedom violations were recorded across the EU and candidate countries. These affected 2,567 individuals or outlets, spanning physical aggression, legal harassment, digital attacks, and censorship. When you mentioned SLAPP, that's strategic lawsuits against public participation, something that the European Union made a clear directive to every country, a member country, and to every country that is a candidate. But slaps, they just go on. I personally, I personally got slapped by top officials of the country. I don't want to dwell into that now, maybe some other time, but I exactly know how it goes. And then all this is worrying, a worrying trend. And then you can imagine how much more difficult it is to be a journalist in Ukraine, how it is to be a journalist on the front line, especially if we know that the Russian aggressor has targeted journalists in the most horrendous way, in a totally criminal way. And currently there are several hundreds of journalists in Russian captivity. And we will discuss that with Lina Kushch very shortly. So I think that we could go on and on with this, developing this topic, but I think that we should invite the expert in it, the person that actually lives through all these challenges, and that's our great guest today, Lina Kushch. Do you agree with me to invite her to get into our show today?
It should be Alina's insights, especially as I mentioned around frontline in Ukraine, are absolutely what we need to hear. So I think it's time to bring Lina into our conversation.
Yes. If I can also ask our producer Aryan to get her in this conversation and say hi to Lina.
Hello to everyone. Hello, Jabir. Thank you for introducing me. Thank you, Roger, for introducing me too. Greetings from Ukraine, greetings from Kyiv. I am sitting in our office of National Union of Journalists of Ukraine in very central of Kyiv now, after a long day, working day with different issues. We solved and aimed to help journalists in different situations.
What's the main challenge? What are the main challenge? We know what the main challenge is, but what are the challenges that your members of the union, the journalists in Ukraine facing? How are they coping with the aggression, with the risk to be killed in the front lines? How is it in the newsrooms in Kyiv, which is bombarded on almost daily basis? Can you describe the situation of the journalists and media in your country, please?
Yeah, you are right that we have different challenges, not one main challenge, but the main challenge of last weeks or last month is the safety of journalists. Because the situation in hot phase of war goes to that journalists faced different obstacles to covering the situation at the front line. And the reason is a lot of FPV drones used by Russia at the front lines. And journalists, as the other civilians, became targets for these drones. We had several cases when journalists' cars or journalists' team were directly attacked by Russian drones because it's like safari for Russians. They follow civilians on those territories. And well-known war journalists, they made a question how they can cover the life of in frontline cities and villages, how they can cover the situation at the front line if they can't get there because of this dangerous situation. For example, big media, big international media, they provide for their teams special equipment, special anti-drone systems and drone defense systems for the cars. And even with this equipment, journalists use military at the last mile. They use military vehicles with this defense from drones. But for example, as to local journalists who are staying there, they have no such equipment because it's expensive, it's not easy to get. They have no such equipment, but they still continue their work. Last week we had an online meeting with our team and with a newspaper in Mezhova. It's a Dnipro region, uh, eastern Ukraine, just about 15 kilometers from Pokrovsk. And the situation get worse last weeks in this around this district, as you can read and hear about this hot situation on the east. And this city is living now the citizens are living without electricity for 2 weeks, without mobile communication, without water, without maybe any utilities. And we didn't manage to contact with our colleagues for several weeks, for several days. We were worried about the situation, and finally we managed to contact with this newsroom and develop different scenarios, develop different ways how we can help them to evacuate. The main obstacles is that all volunteers and all charity foundations, they stopped to evacuate citizens because of dangers on the road controlled by Russian drones. It's very, very dangerous for civilians to use this road and for volunteers as well. So we developed different scenarios how journalists from this newsroom can leave city and where they can stay and so on. We found the new office for this new room, for newsroom, and so on. And editor-in-chief, he said, I have to be here and cover everything what is happening because we understand that we are the only journalists who are here now. And our obligation and our duty is to cover everything. These journalists became famous in social media because their videos were viewed. They get millions of viewers. Yes, because they cover what is happening now near Pokrovsk and the border of Donetsk region. But we are worried of the safety these journalists because there are not enough shelters in the city where they can hide and where they can continue their work, for example, underground. So we insisted in emergency evacuation for them. It's one of cases we are cope with. We are cope with last time. The same. The same plans we developed for North Ukraine, for Sum region, for journalists from there, and for the other regions. We have to be prepared to everything. The second one challenge for Ukrainian media is the loss of all sources for incomes, lost advertisement, lost any partnerships, and so on. And it's especially sensitive for local media because they have no such pillow support, safety pillow for half of a year or for a year. They are not included in big media holdings and so on. And the number of local media shortened from the start of invasion, maybe up to 30%. It's a worried situation because sometimes these local media are the only reliable source for local information on those territories. So it's crucially important to save these media and to save these sources, because when local media stops activity and or disappear, the Russia propaganda takes this space. For example, at the front line, the citizens can hear the Russian radio everywhere, or they can see Russian TV channels through the translation and so on. So it's highly important to save local media. The third challenge we faced is the journalists in Russian captivity. Yes, Jabir, you are right that Russia ignore all international law and all for example, Geneva Conventions that said that civilians can be detained at all. Civilians are not combatants, they are not militaries, and they can be detained. So journalists can be detained because they are not combatant. But Russia ignored all these norms, and now at least 30 Ukrainian journalists are in Russian captivity. And the ways how we can release them, it's unclear because there are no international or national mechanisms. We have no Russian civilians in Ukrainian prisons. Yeah, we have no, because Ukraine stick on the Geneva Conventions. But Ukrainian civilians in Russian prisons or in the prisons on the occupied territories became it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and we don't know, and our officials they don't know how many civilians are held by Russia now, because it's hard to verify. Sometimes it's hard to verify and to get the information from temporarily occupied territories.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely difficult to learn what is the number of both journalists and civilians in general that are in Russian captivity or in the various formats of Russians putting pressure, ill-treating, capturing or imprisoning people. All these facts about the filtration camps, for instance. That's a horrible story. That even children go through those filtration camps and then further being processed in the Russian system. I also am a public advocate for our colleague Vilen Temerianov from Crimea, who is in Russian captivity for 3 years now for just doing his job. And before that, he was actually submitted to the psychiatric the psychiatry. He was put in psychiatry and submitted to punitive psychiatry, which is a Soviet Union model of torturing intellectuals, journalists, and political opponents. And those are really horrible stories. And there is even more horrible, more distressing story of the journalist Victoria Roshchina, which you attended her funeral a few days ago. And that's something that we need to address and not let the world forget these atrocities. I believe that Roger will agree with me and possibly comment on this. And of course, Lina, please, as well.
Well, yes, let's give Lina an opportunity just to gather her thoughts, because Lina was at the Victoria's Roshinsky's funeral a few days ago, which must have been a very moving experience. A young woman, the same age as my oldest daughter, 27 years old, doing her job and murdered by the Russian regime in the most horrible way. I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Victoria for her life, for her work, and I think we must never forget her and what she symbolizes. As Lina has told us, there are 30 journalists in captivity in Russia, as Victoria was. And every day on the front line, where journalists are doing their work, not losing not only their lives, as Lina told us, that the Russians see this as a bit of a safari to pick out and target the journalists who are, as Lina also told us, writing about the local news, because on the front line, citizens don't have water, they don't have public services, but they do have Russian TV and misinformation and lies forced down the whole time. And somebody needs to report locally, and that's what these very courageous journalists are doing, losing not only their lives in some tragic cases, but also, as we heard from Lina, their income and their livelihoods. And Victoria, of course, is the worst example of this, the most painful, traumatic example of this. And many other journalists are facing terrible situations and also losing their lives as Victoria did. And I wonder, Jabir, whether we might take the opportunity of this podcast to bring attention to Victoria's case and perhaps to nominate her. There's a very important human rights prize that the European Parliament has every year, the Sakharov Prize, which I've been looking at this before our conversation with Lina today. I mean, I think normally this is given to living journalists, not those who are not posthumously. But I don't think that stops us nominating her. And I think perhaps we could think about nominating her and inviting our viewers to nominate her for the Sakharov Prize, whether she's eligible or not, because I think. Her case was extreme. She was an extraordinary individual who suffered greatly for what she believed in, doing her job at the end, and was killed by the Russian regime. And she represents as Lina does, as the National Secretary of the Union of Journalists, so many journalists who face terrible pressure because of what's going on, and who are doing such a vital and valuable job for us, the citizens here in Europe and outside Ukraine. But above all for the citizens on the front line themselves in those villages and towns that are under Russian oppression, or from the media that comes across, and having the Russians on their doorstep, trying to invade their towns and cities, to try and keep them informed about what's going on and give them at least some local media that is free from the lies and disinformation of the Russian regime. So let's think about nominating Victoria, but let's also continue let's do it, and let's also offer our condolences through Lina to Victoria and her family, through the National Union of Journalists in Ukraine. Let's nominate her for the Sakharov Human Rights Prize of the European Parliament, and let's continue our conversation with Lina around all of these important themes, which are important not just for people of Ukraine, but for all us in the free world.
Thank you, Roger. That's really an excellent idea. At the same time, it's a moving initiative. What you just said now, and I believe that Lina will have something to say about this. And please, Lina, also condolences from me through you to the family and colleagues of Victoria Roshchina, which gave her life for journalism practically, because she was captured and lost her life in a terrible way, exactly doing her job, telling the facts, finding the truth. Please, Lina, if you have a comment on this.
Thank you, Jabir, and thank you, Roger, for mentioning Victoria Roshchina. Last week we took part at the funeral ceremony in Kyiv, and a lot of journalists came to and they shared their memories about Victoria, and maybe everyone was agreed that her work was for Victoria on the first place. He was such engaged, and he tried to cover the issues undercovered by the other media or by the other journalists. For example, the life of people on the occupied territories. It was her focus, and he said, there are our people, there are our citizens. We have to show how they live, and we had to show them, because it's impossible to see, and we are fighting for these people. So because of that, she decided to travel to occupied territory and develop the story, prepare the story about the people there. And today we have met with former prisoners of war. He is a press officer in Azov, and he was released 1 year ago. He spent over 2 years in the prison, and at a certain time he was in Taganrog detention center at the same time when Victoria Roshchina was there. And our journalists, former prisoners of war, he shared the awful experience from conditions in this prison, in this detention center. He said that they were beaten several times a day, at least 2 times a day. They were beaten for every violation on and so on. They had to execute all demands from penetrators. And Anton, his name Anton, he said it was impossible to maybe we are such different, Ukraine and Russia, because in Ukraine, we have a deep tradition of protests like Maidan or like other form of protest against the authority decisions and so on. But it's impossible in Russia or in Russian prison. It was impossible. If you try to protest, you would be beaten and tortured. We understand now that Victoria, who was such sensitive to every injustice, she suffered from this injustice to herself. And as we know now, he refused to take food, and he lost weight, and he lost the health and the life in her life. It was because she couldn't agree with this injustice, with these conditions. I think we will know maybe in the future more about Victoria's days in the prison, and this truth could shock us, I think. However, it's hard to imagine how we can be shocked more than now. But it's highly important to call to and attract attention to our journalists in Russian prisons. And thank you, Jabir, for your solidarity with William Timirianov. And thank you, dear colleagues, with your solidarity with the other journalists who are in the prison only for their duty, for their job. Yeah, it's. I think we need to talk more about that, and need to find any mediators or any other countries could be involved in solving these issues.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you so much, Lina, for sharing that. Jabir, you want to ask another question?
Well, before going to the question about the future, I'd like to ask Lina if she has, from the perspective of a Ukrainian and the perspective of one of the leaders of the Ukrainian journalists, what's her take on the current development on the historic, under quotation marks, summit in Alaska, which just a day ago, Mr. Trump made a mistake, swapped, he said he's going to Russia and so on. But jokes aside, what's your take on these developments, Lina? Can you tell us a bit what's your opinion about that? What the opinion of Ukrainian journalists and editors is in regards to these developments?
And if I may, Ukrainian citizens as well. I mean, you may be not in a position to give your, personal view or even a statement on behalf of the National Union in relation to the forthcoming summit. Although we would anticipate that you feel as strongly as we do that Ukraine should be included in the conversation at the very least. But I just wonder as Jabir has put it very well, what can you share with us about what your fellow journalists think about this event on Friday? In quite a sort of sober way. I mean, we're used to this sort of how can we put it, surprises, some less pleasant than others from the current incumbent of the White House. But the point is, this is a very serious situation, and any positive development is obviously to be welcomed. But what are your expectations, if any, and and particularly your colleagues and citizens in Ukraine? Obviously, we're very interested in your view, but we also, you're a very good person to tell us something about the view of your colleagues and citizens in Kyiv, and we very much value that.
Thank you, Roger, for the clarification. It's a great addition indeed. Thank you, Lina.
As to situation in Ukraine and the position of Ukrainian journalists and Ukrainian society, maybe no one believes in the so-called peace deal. No one believes in fear peace deal, and however many international media, they are preparing to record interview with local citizens after announcing the so-called ceasefire or peace deal and so on. But as the Ukrainian journalists, as I had described the situation in the frontline territories, with dangerous situation for journalists, for local citizens, with evacuation and so on, and everything is going on the background of this separate negotiation. And we feel that our future is solving without us. The future of Europe is solving without Europe. It's unfair, and it's unacceptable for Ukrainians. It's unacceptable for me, for example, born in Donetsk and lived in Donetsk until 2014, that all Donetsk region will took by Russian control after this deal. It's impossible for me, and it's impossible for many Ukrainians. And Ukrainian media published about that, translating the opinion from ordinary citizens and opinion from Ukrainian experts and so on. And I think that position of Ukrainian society and these opinions from Ukrainians, public opinion, could be an argument and a pressure for President Zelensky and from Ukrainian officials, and for European officials as well, I think, because Ukrainians are not going to refuse from our territories. No. It's unacceptable. We concerning on these demands of exchange by territories or refuse from our territories. We are concerning on hot phase of the war, we concerning of the situation at the front line, and every time when Putin is talking about the ceasefire, about the peace, we have in Kyiv and in the other city severe shellings with a lot of civilian victims. So it's impossible to believe in these promises, because it means the new attacks on Ukrainian cities from Russia.
Thank you very much for this insight. Indeed, we've been witnessing Putin's lies so many times, and as we in the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine have written in one of the past press releases, that Putin, by talking about peace, is actually buying time, and he's buying time with blood. The only currency that Putin is using when speaking about diplomacy and about initiatives about ceasefire or peace is actually the blood of the innocent civilians that he's shedding, and this must stop. The world must stop believing a notorious liar and a war criminal. And I think it's about time to be decisive and show Putin where his place is, not to give him the stage to legitimize and to further listen to his manipulations, and knowing that right after that he will take a break, not to make any steps towards peace, but to actually reload his machinery, his war machine. Yes, with that thought, Lina, I'm very grateful for you to take your time, which is extremely precious, and I know that Kiev is under pressure, tremendous pressure, and your time is valuable. Thank you very much for being with us today in our podcast in the episode 3. And I believe that we will have many returns of you to our podcast, because we cherish what you have to say and what you have to inform the wider public and our audiences.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to Lina coming back. We have so much we want to talk to you about, Lina, and which we don't have time for today, the future of European ecosystems. We want to involve you on behalf of the National Union of Journalists in a conversation that's much wider than Ukraine about the future. We know that despite the terrible circumstances that you've been describing to us, there is a new Ukraine is emerging, there is a new Europe emerging, and your voice needs to be at the forefront of that. And we will be delighted to have you back on future occasions of this podcast to develop those conversations. As I say, not just about Ukraine, about Ukraine and about Europe. And Ukraine and Europe is one. We are united. We don't want to divide Europe. We want a united Europe, and we want a conversation that is open and free. And with you, with your experience, with your courage, and with your insights at the forefront of that, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe, I hope.
Thank you, Jabir, for inviting me to this podcast. Thank you, Roger, for your strong support. And I believe that Westminster Alliance will be a great platform to unite the people from all over Europe and to unite on the platform of our common values. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ukrainian.
Ukraine.
Thank you.
What an incredible conversation, Jabir. What did you take from what Lina had to say to us?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I mean, it was an incredible conversation, and it was very exclusive. Lina gave us a lot of information, a lot of facts. She shared her story and the story of Ukraine. But what I would say, the most important thing, at least to me, what I could take away from this conversation, if it needs to be only one thing, is when she said that Ukraine is not at the table in these Alaska talks. But she also said Europe is not at the table either. And she was so right about it. She was so right saying that Ukraine needs to be part of that that conversation, of those talks, but also Europe, because Ukraine is in Europe. Ukraine is a very important European country, and for not being there, that also means that Europe is not there. And even if it's not there, if Ukraine is not there, Europe is not invited either, and that's not good, to put it the mildest possible way. I mean, what would you say to that? And sorry, but you're a politician, a former member of the UK Parliament. You had very important positions. You were an envoy of the UK Parliament, of the UK government as well in your during your political life. Let's call it that way. You're a thought leader. You're a civil society leader. You know so many people. You're the leader of the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine, gathering parliamentarians across the European Union, particularly the E5 within the coalition of the willing, and doing so much about all these things, about the democratic processes in the continent, on this continent, but also about Europe. So I would ask you, what is your takeaway from what Lina said?
Well, thank you very much, Jabir. Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway was about voice. I mean, Lina shared her own personal view, which was very generous of her, given her position as the National Secretary of the National Union of Journalists. She also shared her view. She shared the view of her colleagues journalist colleagues, and she shared the view of the citizens. And these were very, very similar. That Ukraine has to have, as you said, Ukraine obviously has to have a seat at the table. Ukraine does not want peace at any price. It doesn't want its land traded off against some kind of ceasefire or peace by President Trump. That we would expect that, but it's very good to hear that directly from Lina herself on behalf of the people she's giving voice to the citizens and journalists of Ukraine. And it's not just a question of having the voice, being able to express that voice and being heard. It's really fundamentally, as you've said, being part of the conversation. And as you so rightly said, and as Lina so clearly stated, and I think this point does need to be emphasized to our viewers, and hopefully they will take this on board if they don't see it this way already. It's not just about Ukraine being part of the conversation, it's about the European Union, the whole of Europe being part of the conversation. But we cannot separate Ukraine, the future of Ukraine, from the future of Europe. Not only must Ukraine not be left out of the conversation, Europe mustn't be left out of the conversation. And I think that's the view of Chancellor Merz, and who made, I referred to his statement today, he's with President Zelensky. This is a moment to unite Europe, and not a moment to divide Europe. And we heard that from Lina Kushch. I think we can take that from the conversation from Lina Kushch today. And we don't know what's going to happen, do we, Jabir, on Friday? But I think when we have our next podcast next week, we will be able to dissect that. But I mean, my fear is going into this week is that that's exactly what President Trump will try to do. He's obviously tried to leave. He wants to meet Putin on his own. We'll see whether President Zelensky will be there. We'll see whether he listens to the Europeans. But I mean, the danger is, and we'll come back to this next week, that Trump will try to do a deal directly with Putin involving some kind of giving up of land, which would be unacceptable to not just to President Zelensky, but I'm sure from what we heard from Lina today, as things stand today, to Lina, her colleagues and citizens that she was able to talk about in terms of what she sees and what she's hearing in Kiev. And I think we should listen to that. That we need to listen to different points of view, but we certainly listened to Lina today, and she's a very authoritative view about people of Ukraine and Kiev in particular, in my view. And if America then does back away, let's hope that they don't, but were they to, then it's really important that the Europeans step up to the mark, and we will require much more military support and security support for Ukraine from the Europeans. And the problem is that the Americans have the military capacity, and the Europeans at the moment don't, apart from France and Germany. We talk about the E5 in the Westminster Alliance: Germany, France, Italy, Poland, and the UK, the Europe's biggest defence spenders. But it's really France and Britain who have deployable capacity. But it's really and have again support the Ukraine military either directly or through exports in other ways and so on, investment. But there's a big gap between the aspiration to do that, to move into the gap if the Americans do step back, and the reality of the situation, which all of this will take time. And I think that is why the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine that you mentioned the network of MPs from those E5 countries, I'll say them again, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and the UK, is very important at the core of the coalition of the willing, which is a much larger group, because Europe really needs to get its act together to, and that's what the coalition of willing is about. And what I hope is that my former colleagues, I'm no longer an MP, but my former colleagues and others in other parliaments will also focus on the practical work that needs to be done to make the coalition of the willing a reality and garner public support. And once again, just to finish on this, let's remember, this is not just because we care deeply about the suffering of the people of Ukraine, about the injustice of what has happened, and the absolute requirement to support Ukraine in defending itself and its territory. We believe in that, and we want to do that, and that's the right thing to do, but for Ukraine and for the world. But we also increasingly recognize, as Lina has reminded us today, that this is not just about Ukraine and the future of Ukraine. It is also about the future of Europe. And I'm not going to say that we're going to see Russian troops marching down the Champs-Élysées the year after next, but I am going to say that we cannot trust Putin at all. And he is already undermining our democracies in the European Union. And I say this is about the future of Europe, about the future of Ukraine, and this week in particular. And I think this is the special moment of this week. What the Trump-Putin summit has done, and Chancellor Merz said it very well in his press conference today, and I said it before, but it's worth saying again. Not just about the future of Ukraine, future of Europe. This is a moment for Europe to be united and not divided, as it has been in the past, because division is the path to death, destruction, and war. And the only hope for us in the future is to unite. So what the Trump-Putin summit invites us to do is to remember how important unity is in Europe, unity between Ukraine and the European Union, and to recognize our common interests and our common values, and to strengthen that bond. But there is a long way to go before Europe can give the support to Ukraine that it needs, especially if the Americans pull back. And that's what the Westminster Alliance is about, trying to accelerate that and inject a sense of urgency about that very necessary task. But I think we in terms of second guessing what's going to happen on Friday, Putin and Trump, we'll return to this, I'm sure, Jabir, next week when we have our podcast, when we know what's happened, and we can talk about it on the basis of facts rather than speculation.
That's very important, especially coming from you with your political background and experience. And of course, it's positive to see Europe being united. But let's see a couple of facts about Putin. What is bringing Putin on the table in Alaska? I mean, he started a 3-day special military operation, 3 years and a half, and is involved in a grinding war. He didn't take Kyiv. He didn't topple the Ukrainian government. On the contrary, he united Ukrainians, and he never managed to break their will and their will for freedom, and their struggle for freedom. Instead of all of that he planned, actually he united Europe, he united NATO and NATO countries, most of it, if we exclude a couple of friends that he has in the European Union. We mentioned one of them. But this is an unprecedented Western unity, especially European unity. And far from restoring a Russian sphere of influence, Putin is actually now triggering, or he has triggered, not only NATO expansion, but because there are new members of NATO since his full-scale invasion, but he pushed Ukraine even deeper into the West, being accepted by the West, and exposed the limits of his military, but also political power. And that's what he's bringing to Alaska on Friday.
Well, Jabir, you are very, if I may say so, very courageous and a very effective journalist and you've dedicated a lot of your working life to exposing Putin, the lies, the disinformation, the dark, dangerous, destructive nature of the regime, his manipulation. And I think nobody can be under any illusions listening to you as to what we're dealing with. And let's also remember that you've paid a price for this. You've suffered. You've got constant attacks and so on from on your accounts and so on, and you had to deal with this. Now, what I want to say to you, and what I want to say to our viewers is this: I think that we need to make, it's clear from what Jabir has told us and what he's been writing about for years, and others, we need to make the worst possible assumptions about Putin. But what I want to focus on with the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine and with these podcasts really is very much what we can do, what we need to do under the circumstances. As far as Putin is concerned, we have absolutely no purchase, no control over that whatsoever. Nobody seems to. I mean, he's an authoritarian leader of an authoritarian state. I don't know what his state of mind is, but I'm not very comfortable with it. And I think we have to make the worst possible assumptions about Putin. We, let that not be a distraction from focusing on what it is that we can do as citizens of the European Union or of European countries like the UK that are not members of the European Union but are standing up for Ukraine and for the future of Europe, what it is that we need to do, what our governments need to do, and how we can support them, making the worst possible assumptions about Putin. So I'm not going to second guess what happens on personally, my view is if Putin sets foot on American soil, the first thing that should happen is he should be arrested. But obviously, that's not going to happen. There is going to be a conversation. Let's take it for what it is. And clearly, there can be no solution to Ukraine without the involvement of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, and without the involvement of Europe. And the reason I say that is because we are united in Europe. We're united, aren't we? Not divided. And Ukraine is part of Europe, so we stand together, and we will continue to stand together, and we need to accelerate with this great sense of urgency the practical steps and investment that we need to make to protect Ukraine from the Russian invader.
Well, that's what I would call rationality born in experience and knowledge and wisdom. Thank you for that, Roger. Of course. I think we should round up this episode here, and just to mention that more information, more articles, and more about Westminster Alliance for Ukraine, more about Defending Democracy Global Initiative, and the partner organizations that are founding and running these activities and actions can be found on defendingdemocracy.global. And of course, we are welcoming ideas, articles, questions, and of course, not so gladly, critiques. Of course, critiques and commentaries are most welcome, and it helps us to become better every time we appear on this podcast, and of course in many other formats that we are producing, creating together with Roger, together with great many people who are working together with us in civil, in media dialogue, in the New European People's Forum, and other organizations such as Jean Monnet Association, Centro Studi Internazionali, and so on and so on and so on, and the parliamentarians from across Europe, including Ukraine. Please write to us and tell us how to go on I believe there will be many good advice and critiques over there. Maybe for the last couple of lines, Roger, please.
Well, thank you, dear viewers, for staying with this important podcast with Lina Kushch, National Secretary of the National Union of Journalists, and for your interest, your curiosity, and your commitment to the future of Ukraine. And we look forward to seeing you on next week when we'll be discussing the Putin-Trump summit. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, героям слава. Thank you.